Chapter 1 of the Pickwick Papers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Debra, Lynn. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. The posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club. Chapter 1. The Pickwickians. The first ray of light which illumines the gloom and converts into a dazzling brilliancy that obscurity in which the earlier history of the public career of the immortal Pickwick would appear to be involved, is derived from the perusal of the following entry in the Transactions of the Pickwick Club, which the editor of these papers feels the highest pleasure in laying before his readers, as a proof of the careful attention, indefatigable assiduity, and nice discrimination with which his search among the multifarious documents confided to him has been conducted. May 12th, 1827. Joseph Smiggers, Esquire, P.V.P. M.P.C., Perpetual Vice President, Member Pickwick Club, presiding. The following resolutions unanimously agreed to. That this association has heard read, with feelings of unmingled satisfaction and unqualified approval, the paper communicated by Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C. M.P.C., General Chairman, Member Pickwick Club, entitled Speculations on the Source of the Hampstead Ponds, with some observations on the theory of tittlebats. And that this association does hereby return its warmest thanks to the said Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C.M.P.C., for the same. That while this association is deeply sensible of the advantages which must accrue to the cause of science from the production to which they have just adverted, no less than from the unwearied researches of Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C.M.P.C., in Hornsey, Highgate, Brixton, and Camberwell, they cannot but entertain a lively sense of the inestimable benefits which must inevitably result from carrying the speculations of that learned man into a wider field, from extending his travels, and consequently enlarging his sphere of observation to the advancement of knowledge and the diffusion of learning. That, with the view just mentioned, this association has taken into its serious consideration a proposal, emanating from the aforesaid Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C.M.P.C., and 3 other Pickwickians hereinafter named, for forming a new branch of United Pickwickians, under the title of the Corresponding Society of the Pickwick Club. That the said proposal has received the sanction and approval of this association. That the Corresponding Society of the Pickwick Club is therefore hereby constituted, and that Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, G.C. M.P.C., Tracy Tupman, Esquire, M.P.C., Augustus Snodgrass, Esquire, M.P.C., and Nathaniel Winkle, Esquire, M.P.C., are hereby nominated and appointed members of the same, and that they be requested to forward, from time to time, authenticated accounts of their journeys and investigations, of their observations of character and manners, and of the whole of their adventures, together with all tales and papers to which local scenery or associations may give rise, to the Pickwick Club, stationed in London. That this association cordially recognizes the principle of every member of the corresponding society defraying his own travelling expenses, and that it sees no objection whatever to the members of the said society pursuing their inquiries for any length of time they please upon the same terms. That the members of the aforesaid corresponding society be and are hereby informed that their proposal to pay the postage of their letters and the carriage of their parcels has been deliberated upon by this association. That this association considers such proposal worthy of the great minds from which it emanated, and that it hereby signifies its perfect acquiescence therein. A casual observer, adds the Secretary, to whose notes we are indebted for the following account, a casual observer might possibly have remarked nothing extraordinary in the bald head and circular spectacles which were intently turned towards his, the Secretary's, face during the reading of the above resolutions. To those who knew that the gigantic brain of Pickwick was working beneath that forehead, and that the beaming eyes of Pickwick were twinkling behind those glasses, the sight was indeed an interesting one. There sat the man who had traced to their source the mighty ponds of Hampstead, and agitated the scientific world with his theory of tittlebats, as calm and unmoved as the deep waters of the one on a frosty day, or as a solitary specimen of the other in the inmost recesses of an earthen jar. And how much more interesting did the spectacle become when, starting into full life and animation as a simultaneous call for "Pickwick!" burst from his followers, that illustrious man slowly mounted into the Windsor chair on which he had been previously seated, and addressed the club himself had founded. What a study for an artist did that exciting scene present! The eloquent Pickwick, with one hand gracefully concealed behind his coat tails, and the other waving in air to assist his glowing declamation, his elevated position revealing those tights and gaiters which, had they clothed an ordinary man, might have passed without observation, but which, when Pickwick clothed them, if we may use the expression, inspired involuntary awe and respect. Surrounded by the men who had volunteered to share the perils of his travels, and who were destined to participate in the glories of his discoveries. On his right sat Mr. Tracy Tupman, the too susceptible Tupman, who, to the wisdom and experience of maturer years, superadded the enthusiasm and ardor of a boy in the most interesting and pardonable of human weaknesses, love. Time and feeding had expanded that once romantic form. The black silk waistcoat had become more and more developed. Inch by inch had the gold watch chain beneath it disappeared from within the range of Tupman's vision, and gradually had the capacious chin encroached upon the borders of the white cravat. But the soul of Tupman had known no change. Admiration of the fair sex was still its ruling passion. On the left of his great leader sat the poetic Snodgrass, and near him again the sporting Winkle, the former poetically enveloped in a mysterious blue cloak with a canine skin collar, and the latter communicating additional lustre to a new green shooting coat, plaid neckerchief, and closely fitted drabs. Mr. Pickwick's oration upon this occasion, together with the debate thereon, is entered on the Transactions of the Club. Both bear a strong affinity to the discussions of other celebrated bodies, and, as it is always interesting to trace a resemblance between the proceedings of great men, we transfer the entry to these pages. Mr. Pickwick observed, says the secretary, that fame was dear to the heart of every man. Poetic fame was dear to the heart of his friend Snodgrass. The fame of conquest was equally dear to his friend Tupman, and the desire of earning fame in the sports of the field, the air, and the water was uppermost in the breast of his friend Winkle. He, Mr. Pickwick, would not deny that he was influenced by human passions and human feelings. Cheers! Possibly by human weaknesses, loud cries of "No!" But this he would say, that if ever the fire of self-importance broke out in his bosom, the desire to benefit the human race in preference effectually quenched it. The praise of mankind was his swing. Philanthropy was his insurance office. Vehement cheering. He had felt some pride, he acknowledged it freely, and let his enemies make the most of it. He had felt some pride when he presented his Tittlebatian theory to the world. It might be celebrated, or it might not. A cry of "It is!" and great cheering. He would take the assertion of that honourable Pickwickian whose voice he had just heard. It was celebrated. But if the fame of that treatise were to extend to the farthest confines of the known world, the pride with which he should reflect on the authorship of that production would be as nothing compared with the pride with which he looked around him on this, the proudest moment of his existence. Cheers! He was a humble individual. No, no! Still, he could not but feel that they had selected him for a service of great honour and of some danger. Travelling was in a troubled state, and the minds of coachmen were unsettled. Let them look abroad, and contemplate the scenes which were enacting around them. Stage coaches were upsetting in all directions, horses were bolting, boats were overturning, and boilers were bursting. Cheers! A voice. No! No! Cheers! Let that honourable Pickwickian who cried "No" so loudly come forward and deny it, if he could. Cheers! Who was it that cried "No"? Enthusiastic cheering. Was it some vain and disappointed man? He would not say haberdasher. Loud cheers. Who, jealous of the praise which had been, perhaps undeservedly, bestowed on his, Mr. Pickwick's, researches, and smarting under the censure which had been heaped upon his own feeble attempts at rivalry, now took this vile and calumnious mode of... Mr. Blotton, of Aldgate, rose to order. Did the honourable Pickwickian allude to him? Cries of "Order! Chair! Yes! No! Go on! Leave off!" etc. Mr. Pickwick would not put up to be put down by clamour. He had alluded to the honourable gentleman. Great excitement. Mr. Blotton would only say then that he repelled the honourable gentleman's false and scurrilous accusation with profound contempt. Great cheering. The honourable gentleman was a humbug. Immense confusion and loud cries of "Chair!" and "Order!" Mr. A. Snodgrass rose to order. He threw himself upon the chair. "Here!" He wished to know whether this disgraceful contest between two members of that club should be allowed to continue. "Here! Here!" The chairman was quite sure the honourable Pickwickian would withdraw the expression he had just made use of. Mr. Blotton, with all possible respect for the chair, was quite sure he would not. The chairman felt it his imperative duty to demand of the honourable gentleman whether he had used the expression, which had just escaped him, in a common sense. Mr. Blotton had no hesitation in saying that he had not. He had used the word in its Pickwickian sense. "Here! Here!" He was bound to acknowledge that personally he entertained the highest regard and esteem for the honourable gentleman. He had merely considered him a humbug in a Pickwickian point of view. "Here! Here!" Mr. Pickwick felt much gratified by the fair, candid, and full explanation of his honourable friend. He begged it to be at once understood that his own observations had been merely intended to bear a Pickwickian construction. Cheers! Here the entry terminates, as we have no doubt the debate did also, after arriving at such a highly satisfactory and intelligible point. We have no official statement of the facts which the reader will find recorded in the next chapter, but they have been carefully collated from letters and other manuscript authorities, so unquestionably genuine as to justify their narration in a connected form. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Debra, Lynn. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Chapter 2. The First Day's Journey and the First Evening's Adventures with their Consequences. That punctual servant of all work, the sun, had just risen, and begun to strike a light on the morning of the 13th of May, 1827, when Mr. Samuel Pickwick burst like another sun from his slumbers, threw open his chamber window, and looked out upon the world beneath. Goswell Street was at his feet. Goswell Street was on his right hand, as far as the eye could reach. Goswell Street extended on his left, and the opposite side of Goswell Street was over the way. Such, thought Mr. Pickwick, are the narrow views of those philosophers who, content with examining the things that lie before them, look not to the truths which are hidden beyond. As well might I be content to gaze on Goswell Street forever, without one effort to penetrate to the hidden countries which on every side surround it. And having given vent to this beautiful reflection, Mr. Pickwick proceeded to put himself into his clothes, and his clothes into his portmanteau. Great men are seldom over scrupulous in the arrangement of their attire. The operation of shaving, dressing, and coffee imbibing was soon performed, and in another hour Mr. Pickwick, with his portmanteau in his hand, his telescope in his greatcoat pocket, and his note-book in his waistcoat, ready for the reception of any discoveries worthy of being noted down, had arrived at the coach-stand in St. Martin's le Grand. "Cab," said Mr. Pickwick. "Here you are, sir," shouted a strange specimen of the human race, in a sackcloth coat and apron of the same, who, with a brass label and number round his neck, looked as if he were catalogued in some collection of rarities. This was the waterman. "Here you are, sir. Now then, fust cab." And the first cab having been fetched from the public-house, where he had been smoking his first pipe, Mr. Pickwick and his portmanteau were thrown into the vehicle. "Golden Cross," said Mr. Pickwick. "Only a bob's worth, Tommy," cried the driver sulkily, for the information of his friend the waterman, as the cab drove off. "How old is that horse, my friend?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, rubbing his nose with the shilling he had reserved for the fare. 42, replied the driver, eyeing him askant. "What?" ejaculated Mr. Pickwick, laying his hand upon his note-book. The driver reiterated his former statement. Mr. Pickwick looked very hard at the man's face, but his features were immovable, so he noted down the fact forthwith. "And how long do you keep him out at a time?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, searching for further information. 2 or 3 weeks, replied the man. "Weeks!" said Mr. Pickwick in astonishment, and out came the note-book again. "He lives at Pentonville when he's at home," observed the driver coolly, "but we seldom takes him home on account of his weakness." "On account of his weakness?" reiterated the perplexed Mr. Pickwick. "He always falls down when he's took out of the cab," continued the driver, "but when he's in it, we bears him up wery tight and takes him in wery short, so as he can't wery well fall down, and we've got a pair of precious large wheels on, so when he does move they run after him, and he must go on, he can't help it." Mr. Pickwick entered every word of this statement in his note-book, with the view of communicating it to the club as a singular instance of the tenacity of life in horses under trying circumstances. The entry was scarcely completed when they reached the Golden Cross. Down jumped the driver, and out got Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle, who had been anxiously waiting the arrival of their illustrious leader, crowded to welcome him. "Here's your fare," said Mr. Pickwick, holding out the shilling to the driver. What was the learned man's astonishment when that unaccountable person flung the money on the pavement, and requested in figurative terms to be allowed the pleasure of fighting him, Mr. Pickwick, for the amount. "You are mad," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Or drunk," said Mr. Winkle. "Or both," said Mr. Tupman. "Come on," said the cab driver, sparring away like clockwork. "Come on, all 4 on ye." "Here's a lark!" shouted half a dozen hackney coachmen. "Go to work, Sam!" and they crowded with great glee round the party. "What's the row, Sam?" inquired one gentleman in black calico sleeves. "Row!" replied the cabman. "What did he want my number for?" "I didn't want your number," said the astonished Mr. Pickwick. "What did you take it for, then?" inquired the cabman. "I didn't take it," said Mr. Pickwick indignantly. "Would anybody believe," continued the cab driver, appealing to the crowd, "would anybody believe as an informer to go about in a man's cab, not only taking down his number, but every word he says into the bargain?" A light flashed upon Mr. Pickwick. It was the note-book. "Did he, though?" inquired another cabman. "Yes, did he?" replied the first. "And then, arter aggrawating me to assault him, gets 3 witnesses here to prove it. But I'll give it him if I've 6 months for it. Come on!" And the cabman dashed his hat upon the ground with a reckless disregard of his own private property, and knocked Mr. Pickwick's spectacles off, and followed up the attack with a blow on Mr. Pickwick's nose, and another on Mr. Pickwick's chest, and a third in Mr. Snodgrass's eye, and a fourth, by way of variety, in Mr. Tupman's waistcoat, and then danced into the road, and then back again to the pavement, and finally dashed the whole temporary supply of breath out of Mr. Winkle's body, and all in half a dozen seconds. "Where's an officer?" said Mr. Snodgrass. "Put him under the pump," suggested a hot pieman. "You shall smart for this," gasped Mr. Pickwick. "Informers!" shouted the crowd. "Come on!" cried the cabman, who had been sparring without cessation the whole time. The mob hitherto had been passive spectators of the scene, but as the intelligence of the Pickwickians, being informers, was spread among them, they began to canvass with considerable vivacity the propriety of enforcing the heated pastry vendor's proposition, and there is no saying what acts of personal aggression they might have committed had not the affray been unexpectedly terminated by the interposition of a newcomer. "What's the fun?" said a rather tall, thin young man in a green coat, emerging suddenly from the coach yard. "Informers!" shouted the crowd again. "We are not!" roared Mr. Pickwick, in a tone which to any dispassionate listener carried conviction with it. "Ain't you, though, ain't you?" said the young man, appealing to Mr. Pickwick, and making his way through the crowd by the infallible process of elbowing the countenances of its component members. That learned man in a few hurried words explained the real state of the case. "Come along, then," said he of the green coat, lugging Mr. Pickwick after him by main force, and talking the whole way. "Here, number 924, take your fare and take yourself off. Respectable gentlemen, know him well, none of your nonsense. This way, sir, where's your friends? All a mistake, I see. Never mind, accidents will happen. Best regulated families never say die. Down upon your luck. Pull him up. Put that in his pipe. Like the flavor. Damned rascals," and with a lengthened string of similar broken sentences, delivered with extraordinary volubility, the stranger led the way to the traveller's waiting room, whither he was closely followed by Mr. Pickwick and his disciples. "Here, waiter!" shouted the stranger, ringing the bell with tremendous violence. "Glasses round, brandy and water, hot and strong, and sweet and plenty. Eye damaged, sir? Waiter, raw beefsteak for the gentleman's eye. Nothing like raw beefsteak for a bruise, sir. Cold lamp post very good, but lamp post inconvenient. Damned odd standing in the open street half an hour with your eye against a lamp post, eh? Very good, ha ha!" And the stranger, without stopping to take breath, swallowed at a draught full half a pint of the reeking brandy and water, and flung himself into a chair with as much ease as if nothing uncommon had occurred. While his three companions were busily engaged in proffering their thanks to their new acquaintance, Mr. Pickwick had leisure to examine his costume and appearance. He was about the middle height, but the thinness of his body and the length of his legs gave him the appearance of being much taller. The green coat had been a smart dress garment in the days of swallow-tails, but had evidently in those times adorned a much shorter man than the stranger, for the soiled and faded sleeves scarcely reached to his wrists. It was buttoned closely up to his chin, at the imminent hazard of splitting the back, and an old stock, without a vestige of shirt collar, ornamented his neck. His scanty black trousers displayed here and there those shiny patches which bespeak long service, and were strapped very tightly over a pair of patched and mended shoes, as if to conceal the dirty white stockings, which were nevertheless distinctly visible. His long black hair escaped in negligent waves from beneath each side of his old pinched-up hat, and glimpses of his bare wrists might be observed between the tops of his gloves and the cuffs of his coat sleeves. His face was thin and haggard, but an indescribable air of jaunty impudence and perfect self-possession pervaded the whole man. Such was the individual on whom Mr. Pickwick gazed through his spectacles, which he had fortunately recovered, and to whom he proceeded, when his friends had exhausted themselves, to return in chosen terms his warmest thanks for his recent assistance. "Never mind," said the stranger, cutting the address very short.
Said enough, no more. Smart chap, that cabman. Handled his fives well, but if I'd been your friend in the green, Jemmy, damn me, punch his head, cod I would, pigs whisper, piemen too, no gammon." This coherent speech was interrupted by the entrance of the Rochester coachman to announce that the Commodore was on the point of starting. "Commodore?" said the stranger, starting up. "My coach. Place booked. One outside. Leave you to pay for the brandy and water. Want change for a 5. Bad silver. Brummagem buttons won't do. No go, eh?" And he shook his head most knowingly. Now it so happened that Mr. Pickwick and his 3 companions had resolved to make Rochester their first halting place too, and having intimated to their new found acquaintance that they were journeying to the same city, they agreed to occupy the seat at the back of the coach where they could all sit together. "Up with you," said the stranger, assisting Mr. Pickwick on to the roof with so much precipitation as to impair the gravity of that gentleman's deportment very materially. "Any luggage, sir?" inquired the coachman. "Who, I? Brown paper parcel here, that's all. Other luggage gone by water. Packing cases nailed up, big as houses. Heavy, heavy, damned heavy," replied the stranger, as he forced into his pocket as much as he could of the brown paper parcel, which presented most suspicious indications of containing one shirt and a handkerchief. "Heads, heads, take care of your heads," cried the loquacious stranger, as they came out under the low archway, which in those days formed the entrance to the coach yard. "Terrible place. Dangerous work. Other day, 5 children. Mother, tall lady, eating sandwiches. Forgot the arch. Crash! Knock! Children look round, mother's head off. Sandwich in her hand, no mouth to put it in. Head of a family off. Shocking, shocking. Looking at Whitehall, sir? Fine place. Little window. Somebody else's head off there, eh, sir? He didn't keep a sharp lookout enough either, eh, sir, eh?" "I am ruminating," said Mr. Pickwick, "on the strange mutability of human affairs." "Ah, I see. In at the palace door one day, out at the window the next. Philosopher, sir?" "An observer of human nature, sir," said Mr. Pickwick. "Ah, so am I. Most people are when they've little to do and less to get. Poet, sir?" "My friend Mr. Snodgrass has a strong poetic turn," said Mr. Pickwick. "So have I," said the stranger. "Epic poem, 10,000 lines, Revolution of July, composed it on the spot. Mars by day, Apollo by night, bang the field piece, twang the lyre." "You were present at that glorious scene, sir?" said Mr. Snodgrass. "Present? Think I was." Footnote: a remarkable instance of the prophetic force of Mr. Jingle's imagination, this dialogue occurring in the year 1827, and the Revolution in 1830. End of footnote. "Fired a musket. Fired with an idea. Rushed into wine shop. Wrote it down. Back again. Whiz bang. Another idea. Wine shop again. Pen and ink. Back again. Cut and slash. Noble time, sir. Sportsman, sir?" abruptly turning to Mr. Winkle. "A little, sir," replied that gentleman. "Fine pursuit, sir, fine pursuit. Dogs, sir?" "Not just now," said Mr. Winkle. "Ah, you should keep dogs. Fine animals. Sagacious creatures. Dog of my own once. Pointer. Surprising instinct. Out shooting one day. Entering enclosure. Whistled. Dog stopped. Whistled again. 'Ponto! No go! Stock still!' Called him. 'Ponto! Ponto!' Wouldn't move. Dog transfixed. Staring at a board. Looked up. Saw an inscription. 'Gamekeeper has orders to shoot all dogs found in this enclosure.' Wouldn't pass it. Wonderful dog. Valuable dog, that. Very." "Singular circumstance, that," said Mr. Pickwick. "Will you allow me to make a note of it?" "Certainly, sir, certainly. 100 more anecdotes of the same animal. Fine girl, sir," to Mr. Tracy Tupman, who had been bestowing sundry anti-Pickwickian glances on a young lady by the roadside. "Very," said Mr. Tupman. "English girls not so fine as Spanish. Noble creatures. Jet hair, black eyes, lovely forms, sweet creatures, beautiful." "You have been in Spain, sir?" said Mr. Tracy Tupman. "Lived there ages." "Many conquests, sir?" inquired Mr. Tupman. "Conquests, thousands. Don Bolaro Fizgig, grandee, only daughter, Donna Christina, splendid creature, loved me to distraction, jealous father, high-souled daughter, handsome Englishman, Donna Christina in despair, prussic acid, stomach pump in my portmanteau, operation performed, old Bolaro in ecstasies, consent to our union, join hands in floods of tears, romantic story, very. "Is the lady in England now, sir?" inquired Mr. Tupman, on whom the description of her charms had produced a powerful impression. "Dead, sir, dead," said the stranger, applying to his right eye the brief remnant of a very old cambric handkerchief. "Never recovered the stomach pump. Undermined constitution. Fell a victim." "And her father?" inquired the poetic Snodgrass. "Remorse and misery," replied the stranger. "Sudden disappearance. Talk of the whole city. Search made everywhere without success. Public fountain in the great square suddenly ceased playing. Weeks elapsed. Still a stoppage. Workmen employed to clean it. Water drawn off. Father-in-law discovered sticking head first in the main pipe, with a full confession in his right boot. Took him out, and the fountain played away again as well as ever." "Will you allow me to note that little romance down, sir?" said Mr. Snodgrass, deeply affected. "Certainly, sir, certainly. 50 more if you like to hear 'em. Strange life, mine. Rather curious history. Not extraordinary, but singular." In this strain, with an occasional glass of ale by way of parenthesis, when the coach changed horses, did the stranger proceed, until they reached Rochester Bridge, by which time the note books, both of Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Snodgrass, were completely filled with selections from his adventures. "Magnificent ruin!" said Mr. Augustus Snodgrass, with all the poetic fervour that distinguished him, when they came in sight of the fine old castle. "What a sight for an antiquarian!" were the very words which fell from Mr. Pickwick's mouth as he applied his telescope to his eye. "Ah, fine place!" said the stranger. "Glorious pile! Frowning walls, tottering arches, dark nooks, crumbling staircases, old cathedral too, earthy smell, pilgrims' feet wore away the old steps, little Saxon doors, confessionals like money takers' boxes at theatres, queer customers those monks, popes and lord treasurers, and all sorts of old fellows with great red faces and broken noses turning up every day, buff jerkins too, matchlocks, sarcophagus, fine place, old legends too, strange stories, capital." And the stranger continued to soliloquize until they reached the Bull Inn in the High Street, where the coach stopped. "Do you remain here, sir?" inquired Mr. Nathaniel Winkle. "Here? Not I. But you'd better. Good house, nice beds, Wright's next door. Dear, very dear. £half-a-crown in the bill if you look at the waiter. Charge you more if you dine at a friend's than they would if you dined in the coffee room. Rum fellows, very." Mr. Winkle turned to Mr. Pickwick and murmured a few words. A whisper passed from Mr. Pickwick to Mr. Snodgrass, from Mr. Snodgrass to Mr. Tupman, and nods of assent were exchanged. Mr. Pickwick addressed the stranger. "You rendered us a very important service this morning, sir," said he. "Will you allow us to offer a slight mark of our gratitude by begging the favour of your company at dinner?" "Great pleasure. Not presume to dictate, but broiled fowl and mushrooms, capital thing. What time?" "Let me see," replied Mr. Pickwick, referring to his watch. "It is now nearly 3. Shall we say 5?" "Suit me excellently," said the stranger. 5 precisely. Till then, care of yourselves." And lifting the pinched up hat a few inches from his head, and carelessly replacing it very much on one side, the stranger, with half the brown paper parcel sticking out of his pocket, walked briskly up the yard and turned into the High Street. "Evidently a traveller in many countries, and a close observer of men and things," said Mr. Pickwick. "I should like to see his poem," said Mr. Snodgrass. "I should like to have seen that dog," said Mr. Winkle. Mr. Tupman said nothing, but he thought of Donna Christina, the stomach pump, and the fountain, and his eyes filled with tears. A private sitting room having been engaged, bedrooms inspected, and dinner ordered, the party walked out to view the city and adjoining neighbourhood. We do not find, from a careful perusal of Mr. Pickwick's notes of the four towns, Stroud, Rochester, Chatham, and Brompton, that his impressions of their appearance differ in any material point from those of other travellers who have gone over the same ground. His general description is easily abridged. "The principal productions of these towns," says Mr. Pickwick, "appear to be soldiers, sailors, Jews, chalk, shrimps, officers, and dockyard men. The commodities chiefly exposed for sale in the public streets are marine stores, hard bake, apples, flat fish, and oysters. The streets present a lively and animated appearance, occasioned chiefly by the conviviality of the military. It is truly delightful to a philanthropic mind to see these gallant men staggering along under the influence of an overflow both of animal and ardent spirits, more especially when we remember that the following them about, and jesting with them, affords a cheap and innocent amusement for the boy population. Nothing," adds Mr. Pickwick, "can exceed their good humour. It was but the day before my arrival that one of them had been most grossly insulted in the house of a publican. The barmaid had positively refused to draw him any more liquor, in return for which he had, merely in playfulness, drawn his bayonet, and wounded the girl in the shoulder, and yet this fine fellow was the very first to go down to the house next morning and express his readiness to overlook the matter and forget what had occurred. The consumption of tobacco in these towns," continues Mr. Pickwick, "must be very great, and the smell which pervades the streets must be exceedingly delicious to those who are extremely fond of smoking. A superficial traveller might object to the dirt, which is their leading characteristic, but to those who view it as an indication of traffic and commercial prosperity, it is truly gratifying." Punctual to 5 o'clock came the stranger, and shortly afterwards the dinner. He had divested himself of his brown paper parcel, but had made no alteration in his attire, and was, if possible, more loquacious than ever. "What's that?" he inquired, as the waiter removed one of the covers. "Soles, sir." "Soles! Ah, capital fish! All come from London. Stage coach proprietors get up political dinners. Carriage of soles. Dozens of baskets. Cunning fellows. Glass of wine, sir." "With pleasure," said Mr. Pickwick, and the stranger took wine, first with him, and then with Mr. Snodgrass, and then with Mr. Tupman, and then with Mr. Winkle, and then with the whole party together, almost as rapidly as he talked. "Devil of a mess on the staircase, waiter," said the stranger. "Forms going up, carpenters coming down, lamps, glasses, harps. What's going forward?" "Ball, sir," said the waiter. "Assembly, eh?" "No, sir, not assembly, sir. Ball for the benefit of a charity, sir." "Many fine women in this town, do you know, sir?" inquired Mr. Tupman, with great interest. "Splendid! Capital! Kent, sir, everybody knows Kent. Apples, cherries, hops, and women. Glass of wine, sir?" "With great pleasure," replied Mr. Tupman. The stranger filled and emptied. "I should very much like to go," said Mr. Tupman, resuming the subject of the ball. "Very much." "Tickets at the bar, sir," interposed the waiter. "Half a guinea each, sir." Mr. Tupman again expressed an earnest wish to be present at the festivity, but meeting with no response in the darkened eye of Mr. Snodgrass, or the abstracted gaze of Mr. Pickwick, he applied himself with great interest to the port wine and dessert which had just been placed on the table. The waiter withdrew, and the party were left to enjoy the cosy couple of hours succeeding dinner. "Beg your pardon, sir," said the stranger. "Bottle stands, pass it round, way of the sun, through the buttonhole, no heel taps." And he emptied his glass, which he had filled about 2 minutes before, and poured out another, with the air of a man who was used to it. The wine was passed, and a fresh supply ordered. The visitor talked. The Pickwickians listened. Mr. Tupman felt every moment more disposed for the ball. Mr. Pickwick's countenance glowed with an expression of universal philanthropy, and Mr. Winkle and Mr. Snodgrass fell fast asleep. "They're beginning upstairs," said the stranger. "Hear the company? Fiddles tuning. Now the harp. There they go." The various sounds which found their way downstairs announced the commencement of the first quadrille. "How I should like to go," said Mr. Tupman again. "So should I," said the stranger. "Confounded luggage, heavy smacks, nothing to go in. Odd, ain't it?" Now, general benevolence was one of the leading features of the Pickwickian theory, and no one was more remarkable for the zealous manner in which he observed so noble a principle than Mr. Tracy Tupman. The number of instances recorded on the Transactions of the Society, in which that excellent man referred objects of charity to the houses of other members for left-off garments or pecuniary relief, is almost incredible. "I should be very happy to lend you a change of apparel for the purpose," said Mr. Tracy Tupman, "but you are rather slim, and I am rather fat, grown-up Bacchus, cut the leaves, dismounted from the tub, and adopted Kirsty, eh? Not double distilled, but double milled. Ha, ha! Pass the wine." Whether Mr. Tupman was somewhat indignant at the peremptory tone in which he was desired to pass the wine, which the stranger passed so quickly away, or whether he felt very properly scandalized at an influential member of the Pickwick Club being ignominiously compared to a dismounted Bacchus, is a fact not yet completely ascertained. He passed the wine, coughed twice, and looked at the stranger for several seconds with a stern intensity. As that individual, however, appeared perfectly collected and quite calm under his searching glance, he gradually relaxed, and reverted to the subject of the ball. "I was about to observe, sir," he said, "that though my apparel would be too large, a suit of my friend Mr. Winkle's would, perhaps, fit you better." The stranger took Mr. Winkle's measure with his eye, and that feature glistened with satisfaction as he said, "Just the thing." Mr. Tupman looked round him. The wine, which had exerted its somniferous influence over Mr. Snodgrass and Mr. Winkle, had stolen upon the senses of Mr. Pickwick. That gentleman had gradually passed through the various stages which precede the lethargy produced by dinner and its consequences. He had undergone the ordinary transitions from the height of conviviality to the depth of misery, and from the depth of misery to the height of conviviality. Like a gas lamp in the street, with the wind in the pipe, he had exhibited for a moment an unnatural brilliancy, then sank so low as to be scarcely discernible. After a short interval he had burst out again to enlighten for a moment, then flickered with an uncertain, staggering sort of light, and then gone out altogether. His head was sunk upon his bosom, and perpetual snoring, with a partial choke occasionally, were the only audible indications of the great man's presence. The temptation to be present at the ball, and to form his first impressions of the beauty of the Kentish ladies, was strong upon Mr. Tupman. The temptation to take the stranger with him was equally great. He was wholly unacquainted with the place and its inhabitants, and the stranger seemed to possess as great a knowledge of both as if he had lived there from his infancy. Mr. Winkle was asleep, and Mr. Tupman had had sufficient experience in such matters to know that the moment he awoke he would, in the ordinary course of nature, roll heavily to bed. He was undecided.
"Fill your glass and pass the wine," said the indefatigable visitor.
Mr. Tupman did as he was requested, and the additional stimulus of the last glass settled his determination. "Winkle's bedroom is inside mine," said Mr. Tupman. "I couldn't make him understand what I wanted if I woke him now, but I know he has a dress suit in a carpet bag, and supposing you wore it to the ball, and took it off when we returned, I could replace it without troubling him at all about the matter." "Capital!" said the stranger. "Famous plan. Damned odd situation. 14 coats in the packing cases, and obliged to wear another man's. Very good notion that, very." "We must purchase our tickets," said Mr. Tupman. "Not worth while splitting a guinea," said the stranger. "Toss who shall pay for both. I call. You spin. First time. Woman, woman, bewitching woman," and down came the sovereign with the dragon, called by courtesy a woman, uppermost. Mr. Tupman rang the bell, purchased the tickets, and ordered chamber candlesticks. In another quarter of an hour the stranger was completely arrayed in a full suit of Mr. Nathaniel Winkle's. "It's a new coat," said Mr. Tupman, as the stranger surveyed himself with great complacency in a cheval glass. "The first that's been made with our club button," and he called his companion's attention to the large gilt button which displayed a bust of Mr. Pickwick in the centre, and the letters P.C. on either side. "P.C.," said the stranger. "Queer set out. Old fellow's likeness and P.C. What does P.C. stand for? Peculiar coat, eh?" Mr. Tupman, with rising indignation and great importance, explained the mystic device. "Rather short in the waist, ain't it?" said the stranger, screwing himself round to catch a glimpse in the glass of the waist buttons, which were halfway up his back. "Like a general postman's coat. Queer coats those, made by contract, no measuring. Mysterious dispensations of Providence. All the short men get long coats, all the long men short ones." Running on in this way, Mr. Tupman's new companion adjusted his dress, or rather the dress of Mr. Winkle, and, accompanied by Mr. Tupman, ascended the staircase leading to the ballroom. "What names, sir?" said the man at the door. Mr. Tracy Tupman was stepping forward to announce his own titles when the stranger prevented him. "No names at all." And then he whispered Mr. Tupman, "Names won't do, not known. Very good names in their way, but not great ones. Capital names for a small party, but won't make an impression in public assemblies. Incog the thing. Gentlemen from London. Distinguished foreigners. Anything." The door was thrown open, and Mr. Tracy Tupman and the stranger entered the ballroom. It was a long room with crimson-covered benches and wax candles and glass chandeliers. The musicians were securely confined in an elevated den, and quadrilles were being systematically got through by 2 or 3 sets of dancers. 2 card tables were made up in the adjoining card room, and 2 pair of old ladies and a corresponding number of stout gentlemen were executing whist therein. The finale concluded, the dancers promenaded the room, and Mr. Tupman and his companion stationed themselves in a corner to observe the company. "Charming women," said Mr. Tupman. "Wait a minute," said the stranger. "Fun presently. Nobs not come yet. Queer place. Dockyard people of upper rank don't know dockyard people of lower rank. Dockyard people of lower rank don't know small gentry. Small gentry don't know tradespeople. Commissioner don't know anybody." "Who's that little boy with the light hair and pink eyes and a fancy dress?" inquired Mr. Tupman. "Hush! Pray, pink eyes, fancy dress, little boy, nonsense. Ensign 97th, Honorable Wilmot Snipe, great family, Snipes, very. Sir Thomas Clubber, Lady Clubber, and the Misses Clubber," shouted the man at the door in a stentorian voice. A great sensation was created throughout the room by the entrance of a tall gentleman in a blue coat and bright buttons, a large lady in blue satin, and 2 young ladies on a similar scale in fashionably made dresses of the same hue. "Commissioner, head of the yard, great man, remarkably great man," whispered the stranger in Mr. Tupman's ear, as the charitable committee ushered Sir Thomas Clubber and family to the top of the room. The Honorable Wilmot Snipe and other distinguished gentlemen crowded to render homage to the Misses Clubber, and Sir Thomas Clubber stood bolt upright and looked majestically over his black kerchief at the assembled company. "Mr. Smithie, Mrs. Smithie, and the Misses Smithie," was the next announcement. "What's Mr. Smithie?" inquired Mr. Tracy Tupman. "Something in the yard," replied the stranger. Mr. Smithie bowed deferentially to Sir Thomas Clubber, and Sir Thomas Clubber acknowledged the salute with conscious condescension. Lady Clubber took a telescopic view of Mrs. Smithie and family through her eyeglass, and Mrs. Smithie stared in her turn at Mrs. Somebody else, whose husband was not in the dockyard at all. Colonel Bulder, Mrs. Colonel Bulder, and Miss Bulder were the next arrivals. "Head of the garrison," said the stranger, in reply to Mr. Tupman's inquiring look. Miss Bulder was warmly welcomed by the Misses Clubber. The greeting between Mrs. Colonel Bulder and Lady Clubber was of the most affectionate description. Colonel Bulder and Sir Thomas Clubber exchanged snuff boxes, and looked very much like a pair of Alexander Selkirks, monarchs of all they surveyed. While the aristocracy of the place, the Bulders and Clubbers and Snipes, were thus preserving their dignity at the upper end of the room, the other classes of society were imitating their example in other parts of it. The less aristocratic officers of the 97th devoted themselves to the families of the less important functionaries from the dockyard. The solicitors' wives and the wine merchant's wife headed another grade. The brewer's wife visited the Bulders, and Mrs. Tomlinson, the post office keeper, seemed, by mutual consent, to have been chosen the leader of the trade party. One of the most popular personages in his own circle present was a little fat man with a ring of upright black hair round his head and an extensive bald plain on the top of it. Dr. Slammer, surgeon to the 97th. The doctor took snuff with everybody, chatted with everybody, laughed, danced, made jokes, played whist, did everything and was everywhere. To these pursuits, multifarious as they were, the little doctor added a more important one than any.
He was indefatigable
In paying the most unremitting and devoted attention to a little old widow whose rich dress and profusion of ornament bespoke her a most desirable addition to a limited income. Upon the doctor and the widow the eyes of both Mr. Tupman and his companion had been fixed for some time, when the stranger broke silence. "Lots of money, old girl, pompous doctor, not a bad idea, good fun," were the intelligible sentences which issued from his lips. Mr. Tupman looked inquisitively in his face. "I'll dance with the widow," said the stranger. "Who is she?" inquired Mr. Tupman. "Don't know, never saw her in all my life. Cut out the doctor, here goes." And the stranger forthwith crossed the room, and leaning against the mantelpiece, commenced gazing with an air of respectful and melancholy admiration on the fat countenance of the little old lady. Mr. Tupman looked on in mute astonishment. The stranger progressed rapidly. The little doctor danced with another lady, the widow dropped her fan, the stranger picked it up, and presented it, a smile, a bow, a curtsy, a few words of conversation. The stranger walked boldly up to and returned with the master of the ceremonies, a little introductory pantomime, and the stranger and Mrs. Budger took their places in a quadrille. The surprise of Mr. Tupman at this summary proceeding, great as it was immeasurably exceeded by the astonishment of the doctor. The stranger was young, and the widow was flattered. The doctor's attentions were unheeded by the widow, and the doctor's indignation was wholly lost on his imperturbable rival. Dr. Slammer was paralyzed. He, Dr. Slammer of the 97th, to be extinguished in a moment by a man whom nobody had ever seen before, and whom nobody knew even now. Dr. Slammer of the 97th rejected? Impossible. It could not be. Yes, it was. There they were. What? Introducing his friend? Could he believe his eyes? He looked again, and was under the painful necessity of admitting the veracity of his optics. Mrs. Budger was dancing with Mr. Tracy Tupman. There was no mistaking the fact. There was the widow before him, bouncing bodily here and there with unwonted vigor, and Mr. Tracy Tupman hopping about with a face expressive of the most intense solemnity, dancing, as a good many people do, as if a quadrille were not a thing to be laughed at, but a severe trial to the feelings, which it requires inflexible resolution to encounter. Silently and patiently did the doctor bear all this, and all the handings of negus, and watching for glasses, and darting for biscuits, and coquetting that ensued. But a few seconds after the stranger had disappeared to lead Mrs. Budger to her carriage, he darted swiftly from the room with every particle of his hitherto bottled-up indignation effervescing from all parts of his countenance in a perspiration of passion. The stranger was returning, and Mr. Tupman was beside him. He spoke in a low tone and laughed. The little doctor thirsted for his life. He was exulting. He had triumphed. "Sir," said the doctor in an awful voice, producing a card and retiring into an angle of the passage, "my name is Slammer, Dr. Slammer, sir, 97th Regiment, Chatham Barracks. My card, sir, my card." He would have added more, but his indignation choked him. "Ah," replied the stranger coolly, "Slammer, much obliged. Polite attention. Not ill now, Slammer, but when I am, knock you up." "You're a shuffler, sir," gasped the furious doctor, "a poltroon, a coward, a liar, will nothing induce you to give me your card, sir?" "Oh, I see," said the stranger, half aside. "Negus too strong here. Liberal landlord, very foolish, very. Lemonade much better. Hot rooms, elderly gentlemen suffer for it in the morning. Cruel, cruel." And he moved on a step or two. "You are stopping in this house, sir," said the indignant little man. "You are intoxicated now, sir. You shall hear from me in the morning, sir. I shall find you out, sir. I shall find you out." "Rather you found me out than found me at home," replied the unmoved stranger. Dr. Slammer looked unutterable ferocity as he fixed his hat on his head with an indignant knock, and the stranger and Mr. Tupman ascended to the bedroom of the latter to restore the borrowed plumage to the unconscious Winkle. That gentleman was fast asleep, The restoration was soon made. The stranger was extremely jocose, and Mr. Tracy Tupman, being quite bewildered with wine, negus, lights, and ladies, thought the whole affair was an exquisite joke. His new friend departed, and after experiencing some slight difficulty in finding the orifice in his nightcap, originally intended for the reception of his head, and finally overturning his candlestick in his struggles to put it on, Mr. Tracy Tupman managed to get into bed by a series of complicated evolutions, and shortly afterwards sank into repose. 7 o'clock had hardly ceased striking on the following morning when Mr. Pickwick's comprehensive mind was aroused from the state of unconsciousness in which slumber had plunged it by a loud knocking at his chamber door. "Who's there?" said Mr. Pickwick, starting up in bed. "Boots, sir." "What do you want?" "Please, sir, can you tell me which gentleman of your party wears a bright blue dress coat with a gilt button with P.C. on it?" "It's been given out to brush," thought Mr. Pickwick, "and the man has forgotten whom it belongs to." "Mr. Winkle," he called out, "next room but 2 on the right hand." "Thank you, sir," said the Boots, and away he went. "What's the matter?" cried Mr. Tupman, as a loud knocking at his door roused him from his oblivious repose. "Can I speak to Mr. Winkle, sir?" replied Boots from the outside. "Winkle! Winkle!" shouted Mr. Tupman, calling into the inner room. "Hullo!" replied a faint voice from within the bedclothes. "You're wanted. Some one at the door." And having exerted himself to articulate thus much, Mr. Tracy Tupman turned round and fell fast asleep again. "Wanted!" said Mr. Winkle, hastily jumping out of bed, and putting on a few articles of clothing. "Wanted! At this distance from town! Who on earth can want me?" "Gentleman in the coffee room, sir," replied the Boots, as Mr. Winkle opened the door and confronted him. "Gentleman says he'll not detain you a moment, sir, but he can take no denial." "Very odd," said Mr. Winkle. "I'll be down directly." He hurriedly wrapped himself in a travelling shawl and dressing gown, and proceeded downstairs. An old woman and a couple of waiters were cleaning the coffee room, and an officer in undress uniform was looking out of the window. He turned round as Mr. Winkle entered, and made a stiff inclination of the head. Having ordered the attendants to retire and closed the door very carefully, he said, "Mr. Winkle, I presume?" "My name is Winkle, sir." "You will not be surprised, sir, when I inform you that I have called here this morning on behalf of my friend, Dr. Slammer of the 97th. "Dr. Slammer?" said Mr. Winkle. "Dr. Slammer. He begged me to express his opinion that your conduct of last evening was of a description which no gentleman could endure, and," he added, "which no one gentleman would pursue towards another." Mr. Winkle's astonishment was too real and too evident to escape the observation of Dr. Slammer's friend. He therefore proceeded. "My friend, Dr. Slammer, requested me to add that he was firmly persuaded you were intoxicated during a portion of the evening, and possibly unconscious of the extent of the insult you were guilty of. He commissioned me to say that should this be pleaded as an excuse for your behaviour, he will consent to accept a written apology to be penned by you from my dictation." "A written apology!" repeated Mr. Winkle, in the most emphatic tone of amazement possible. "Of course you know the alternative," replied the visitor coolly. "Were you entrusted with this message to me by name?" inquired Mr. Winkle, whose intellects were hopelessly confused by this extraordinary conversation. "I was not present myself," replied the visitor, "and in consequence of your firm refusal to give your card to Dr. Slammer, I was desired by that gentleman to identify the wearer of a very uncommon coat, a bright blue dress coat with a gilt button displaying a bust and the letters P.C." Mr. Winkle actually staggered with astonishment as he heard his own costume thus minutely described. Dr. Slammer's friend proceeded. "From the inquiries I made at the bar just now, I was convinced that the owner of the coat in question arrived here with 3 gentlemen yesterday afternoon. I immediately sent up to the gentleman who was described as appearing the head of the party, and he at once referred me to you. If the principal tower of Rochester Castle had suddenly walked from its foundation and stationed itself opposite the coffee room window, Mr. Winkle's surprise would have been as nothing compared with the profound astonishment with which he had heard this address. His first impression was that his coat had been stolen. "Will you allow me to detain you one moment?" said he. "Certainly," replied the unwelcome visitor. Mr. Winkle ran hastily upstairs, and with a trembling hand opened the bag. There was the coat in its usual place, but exhibiting, on a close inspection, evident tokens of having been worn on the preceding night. "It must be so," said Mr. Winkle, letting the coat fall from his hands. "I took too much wine after dinner, and have a very vague recollection of walking about the streets and smoking a cigar afterwards. The fact is, I was very drunk. I must have changed my coat, gone somewhere, and insulted somebody. I have no doubt of it. And this message is the terrible consequence." Saying which, Mr. Winkle retraced his steps in the direction of the coffee room, with the gloomy and dreadful resolve of accepting the challenge of the warlike Dr. Slammer, and abiding by the worst consequences that might ensue. To this determination Mr. Winkle was urged by a variety of considerations, the first of which was his reputation with the club. He had always been looked up to as a high authority on all matters of amusement and dexterity, whether offensive, defensive, or inoffensive, and if, on this very first occasion of being put to the test, he shrunk back from the trial beneath his leader's eye, his name and standing were lost for ever. Besides, he remembered to have heard it frequently surmised by the uninitiated in such matters, that by an understood arrangement between the seconds, the pistols were seldom loaded with ball, and furthermore he reflected that if he applied to Mr. Snodgrass to act as his second, and depicted the danger in glowing terms, that gentleman might possibly communicate the intelligence to Mr. Pickwick, who would certainly lose no time in transmitting it to the local authorities, and thus prevent the killing or maiming of his follower. Such were his thoughts when he returned to the coffee room, and intimated his intention of accepting the doctor's challenge. "Will you refer me to a friend to arrange the time and place of meeting?" said the officer. "Quite unnecessary," replied Mr. Winkle. "Name them to me, and I can procure the attendance of a friend afterwards." "Shall we say sunset this evening?" inquired the officer in a careless tone. "Very good," replied Mr. Winkle, thinking in his heart it was very bad. "You know Fort Pitt?" "Yes, I saw it yesterday." "If you will take the trouble to turn into the field which borders the trench, take the footpath to the left when you arrive at an angle of the fortification, and keep straight on till you see me, I will precede you to a secluded place where the affair can be conducted without fear of interruption." "Fear of interruption!" thought Mr. Winkle. "Nothing more to arrange, I think," said the officer. "I am not aware of anything more," replied Mr. Winkle. "Good morning." "Good morning," and the officer whistled a lively air as he strode away. That morning's breakfast passed heavily off. Mr. Tupman was not in a condition to rise after the unwonted dissipation of the previous night. Mr. Snodgrass appeared to labour under a poetical depression of spirits, and even Mr. Pickwick evinced an unusual attachment to silence and soda water. Mr. Winkle eagerly watched his opportunity. It was not long wanting. Mr. Snodgrass proposed a visit to the castle, and as Mr. Winkle was the only other member of the party disposed to walk, they went out together. "Snodgrass," said Mr. Winkle, when they had turned out of the public street, "Snodgrass, my dear fellow, can I rely upon your secrecy?" As he said this, he most devoutly and earnestly hoped he could not. "You can," replied Mr. Snodgrass. "Hear me swear—" "No," interrupted Winkle, terrified at the idea of his companion's unconsciously pledging himself not to give information. Don't swear, it's quite unnecessary." Mr. Snodgrass dropped the hand which he had, in the spirit of poesy, raised towards the clouds as he made the above appeal, and assumed an attitude of attention. "I want your assistance, my dear fellow, in an affair of honour," said Mr. Winkle. "You shall have it," replied Mr. Snodgrass, clasping his friend's hand. "With a doctor, Dr. Slammer of the 97th," said Mr. Winkle, wishing to make the matter appear as solemn as possible. "An affair with an officer, seconded by another officer, at sunset this evening in a lonely field beyond Fort Pitt." "I will attend you," said Mr. Snodgrass. He was astonished, but by no means dismayed. It is extraordinary how cool any party but the principal can be in such cases. Mr. Winkle had forgotten this. He had judged of his friend's feelings by his own. "The consequences may be dreadful," said Mr. Winkle. "I hope not," said Mr. Snodgrass. "The doctor, I believe, is a very good shot," said Mr. Winkle. "Most of these military men are," observed Mr. Snodgrass calmly. "But so are you, ain't you?" Mr. Winkle replied in the affirmative, and perceiving that he had not alarmed his companion sufficiently, changed his ground. "Snodgrass," he said, in a voice tremulous with emotion, "if I fall, you will find in a packet which I shall place in your hands a note for my father." This attack was a failure also. Mr. Snodgrass was affected, but he undertook the delivery of the note as readily as if he had been a twopenny postman. "If I fall," said Mr. Winkle, "or if the doctor falls, you, my dear friend, will be tried as an accessory before the fact. Shall I involve my friend in transportation, possibly for life?" Mr. Snodgrass winced a little at this, but his heroism was invincible. "In the cause of friendship," he fervently exclaimed, "I would brave all dangers." How Mr. Winkle cursed his companion's devoted friendship internally, as they walked silently along, side by side, for some minutes, each immersed in his own meditations. The morning was wearing away. He grew desperate. "Snodgrass," he said, stopping suddenly, "do not let me be balked in this matter. Do not give information to the local authorities. Do not obtain the assistance of several peace officers to take either me or Dr. Slammer of the 97th Regiment, at present quartered in Chatham Barracks, into custody, and thus prevent this duel. I say do not." Mr. Snodgrass seized his friend's hand warmly as he enthusiastically replied, "Not for worlds." A thrill passed over Mr. Winkle's frame as the conviction that he had nothing to hope from his friend's fears, and that he was destined to become an animated target, rushed forcibly upon him. The state of the case having been formally explained to Mr. Snodgrass, and a case of satisfactory pistols, with the satisfactory accompaniments of powder, ball, and caps, having been hired from a manufacturer in Rochester, the two friends returned to their inn. Mr. Winkle to ruminate on the approaching struggle, and Mr. Snodgrass to arrange the weapons of war and put them into proper order for immediate use. It was a dull and heavy evening when they again sallied forth on their awkward errand. Mr. Winkle was muffled up in a huge cloak to escape observation, and Mr. Snodgrass bore under his the instruments of destruction. "Have you got everything?" said Mr. Winkle in an agitated tone. "Everything," replied Mr. Snodgrass. "Plenty of ammunition in case the shots don't take effect. There's 1/4 pound of powder in the case, and I have got 2 newspapers in my pocket for the loadings." These were instances of friendship for which any man might reasonably feel most grateful. The presumption is that the gratitude of Mr. Winkle was too powerful for utterance, as he said nothing, but continued to walk on, rather slowly. "We are in excellent time," said Mr. Snodgrass, as they climbed the fence of the first field. "The sun is just going down." Mr. Winkle looked up at the declining orb, and painfully thought of the probability of his going down himself before long. "There's the officer!" exclaimed Mr. Winkle, after a few minutes' walking. "Where?" said Mr. Snodgrass. "There, the gentleman in the blue cloak." Mr. Snodgrass looked in the direction indicated by the forefinger of his friend, and observed a figure, muffled up as he had described. The officer evinced his consciousness of their presence by slightly beckoning with his hand, and the two friends followed him at a little distance as he walked away. The evening grew more dull every moment, and a melancholy wind sounded through the deserted fields, like a distant giant whistling for his house dog. The sadness of the scene imparted a sombre tinge to the feelings of Mr. Winkle. He started as they passed the angle of the trench. It looked like a colossal grave. The officer turned suddenly from the path, and after climbing a paling and scaling a hedge, entered a secluded field. 2 gentlemen were waiting in it. One was a little fat man with black hair, and the other, a portly personage in a braided surtout, was sitting with perfect equanimity on a camp stool. "The other party and a surgeon, I suppose," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Take a drop of brandy." Mr. Winkle seized the wicker bottle which his friend proffered, and took a lengthened pull at the exhilarating liquid. "My friend, sir, Mr. Snodgrass," said Mr. Winkle, as the officer approached. Dr. Slammer's friend bowed, and produced a case similar to that which Mr. Snodgrass carried. "We have nothing further to say, sir, I think," he coldly remarked, as he opened the case. "An apology has been resolutely declined." "Nothing, sir," said Mr. Snodgrass, who began to feel rather uncomfortable himself. "Will you step forward?" said the officer. "Certainly," replied Mr. Snodgrass. The ground was measured and preliminaries arranged. "You will find these better than your own," said the opposite second, producing his pistols. "You saw me load them. Do you object to use them?" "Certainly not," replied Mr. Snodgrass. The offer relieved him from considerable embarrassment, for his previous notions of loading a pistol were rather vague and undefined. "We may place our men, then, I think," observed the officer, with as much indifference as if the principals were chessmen and the seconds players. "I think we may," replied Mr. Snodgrass, who would have assented to any proposition because he knew nothing about the matter. The officer crossed to Dr. Slammer, and Mr. Snodgrass went up to Mr. Winkle. "It's all ready," said he, offering the pistol. "Give me your cloak." "You have got the packet, my dear fellow," said poor Winkle. "All right," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Be steady and wing him." It occurred to Mr. Winkle that this advice was very like that which bystanders invariably give to the smallest boy in a street fight, namely, "Go in and win!" An admirable thing to recommend, if you only know how to do it. He took off his cloak, however, in silence (it always took a long time to undo that cloak), and accepted the pistol. The seconds retired. The gentleman on the camp stool did the same, and the belligerents approached each other. Mr. Winkle was always remarkable for extreme humanity. It is conjectured that his unwillingness to hurt a fellow creature intentionally was the cause of his shutting his eyes when he arrived at the fatal spot, and that the circumstance of his eyes being closed prevented his observing the very extraordinary and unaccountable demeanour of Dr. Slammer. That gentleman started, stared, retreated, rubbed his eyes, stared again, and finally shouted, "Stop! Stop!" "What's all this?" said Dr. Slammer, as his friend and Mr. Snodgrass came running up. "That's not the man." "Not the man!" said Dr. Slammer's second. "Not the man!" said Mr. Snodgrass. "Not the man?" said the gentleman with the camp stool in his hand. "Certainly not," replied the little doctor. "That's not the person who insulted me last night." "Very extraordinary!" exclaimed the officer. "Very," said the gentleman with the camp stool. "The only question is, whether the gentleman, being on the ground, must not be considered, as a matter of form, to be the individual who insulted our friend Dr. Slammer yesterday evening, whether he is really that individual or not." And having delivered this suggestion with a very sage and mysterious air, the man with the camp stool took a large pinch of snuff, and looked profoundly round with the air of an authority in such matters. Now Mr. Winkle had opened his eyes, and his ears too, when he heard his adversary call out for a cessation of hostilities, and perceiving by what he had afterwards said that there was, beyond all question, some mistake in the matter, he at once foresaw the increase of reputation he should inevitably acquire by concealing the real motive of his coming out. He therefore stepped boldly forward and said, "I am not the person. I know it." "Then that," said the man with the camp stool, "is an affront to Dr. Slammer, and a sufficient reason for proceeding immediately." "Pray be quiet, Payne," said the doctor's second. "Why did you not communicate this fact to me this morning, sir?" To be sure," said the man with the camp stool indignantly. "I entreat you to be quiet, Payne," said the other. "May I repeat my question, sir?" "Because, sir," replied Mr. Winkle, who had had time to deliberate upon his answer, "because, sir, you described an intoxicated and ungentlemanly person as wearing a coat which I have the honour not only to wear but to have invented, the proposed uniform, sir, of the Pickwick Club in London. The honour of that uniform I feel bound to maintain, and I therefore without inquiry accepted the challenge which you offered me." "My dear sir," said the good-humoured little doctor, advancing with extended hand, "I honour your gallantry. Permit me to say, sir, that I highly admire your conduct, and extremely regret having caused you the inconvenience of this meeting to no purpose." "I beg you won't mention it, sir," said Mr. Winkle. I shall feel proud of your acquaintance, sir," said the little doctor. "It will afford me the greatest pleasure to know you, sir," replied Mr. Winkle. Thereupon the doctor and Mr. Winkle shook hands, and then Mr. Winkle and Lieutenant Tappleton, the doctor's second, and then Mr. Winkle and the man with the camp stool, and finally Mr. Winkle and Mr. Snodgrass, the last named gentleman in an excess of admiration at the noble conduct of his heroic friend. "I think we may adjourn," said Lieutenant Tappleton. "Certainly," added the doctor. "Unless," interposed the man with the camp stool, "unless Mr. Winkle feels himself aggrieved by the challenge, in which case I submit he has a right to satisfaction." Mr. Winkle, with great self-denial, expressed himself quite satisfied already. "Or possibly," said the man with the camp stool, "the gentleman's second may feel himself affronted with some observations which fell from me at an early period of this meeting. If so, I shall be happy to give him satisfaction immediately." Mr. Snodgrass hastily professed himself very much obliged with the handsome offer of the gentleman who had spoken last, which he was only induced to decline by his entire contentment with the whole proceedings. The two seconds adjusted the cases, and the whole party left the ground in a much more lively manner than they had proceeded to it. "Do you remain long here?" inquired Dr. Slammer of Mr. Winkle, as they walked on most amicably together. "I think we shall leave here the day after to-morrow," was the reply. "I trust I shall have the pleasure of seeing you and your friend at my rooms, and of spending a pleasant evening with you after this awkward mistake," said the little doctor. "Are you disengaged this evening?" "We have some friends here," replied Mr. Winkle, "and I should not like to leave them to-night. Perhaps you and your friend will join us at the Bull." "With great pleasure," said the little doctor. "Will 10 o'clock be too late to look in for half an hour?" "Oh dear no," said Mr. Winkle. "I shall be most happy to introduce you to my friends, Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Tupman." "It will give me great pleasure, I am sure," replied Dr. Slammer, little suspecting who Mr. Tupman was. "You will be sure to come?" said Mr. Snodgrass. "Oh, certainly." By this time they had reached the road. Cordial farewells were exchanged, and the party separated. Dr. Slammer and his friends repaired to the barracks, and Mr. Winkle, accompanied by Mr. Snodgrass, returned to their inn. End of chapter 2.
Of the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Debra, Lynn. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Chapter 3. A New Acquaintance, The Stroller's Tale, A Disagreeable Interruption, and an Unpleasant Encounter.
Mr. Pickwick had felt some apprehensions in consequence of the unusual absence of his two friends, which their mysterious behaviour during the whole morning had by no means tended to diminish. It was, therefore, with more than ordinary pleasure that he rose to greet them when they again entered, and with more than ordinary interest that he inquired what had occurred to detain them from his society. In reply to his questions on this point, Mr. Snodgrass was about to offer an historical account of the circumstances just now detailed, when he was suddenly checked by observing that there were present not only Mr. Tupman and their stage-coach companion of the preceding day, but another stranger of equally singular appearance. It was a careworn looking man, whose sallow face and deeply sunken eyes were rendered still more striking than nature had made them by the straight black hair which hung in matted disorder half-way down his face. His eyes were almost unnaturally bright and piercing. His cheek-bones were high and prominent, and his jaws were so long and lank that an observer would have supposed that he was drawing the flesh of his face in for a moment by some contraction of the muscles, if his half-opened mouth and immovable expression had not announced that it was his ordinary appearance. Round his neck he wore a green shawl, with the large ends straggling over his chest, and making their appearance occasionally beneath the worn button-holes of his old waistcoat. His upper garment was a long black surtout, and below it he wore wide drab trousers and large boots running rapidly to seed. It was on this uncouth-looking person that Mr. Winkle's eye rested, and it was towards him that Mr. Pickwick extended his hand when he said, A friend of our friend's here. We discovered this morning that our friend was connected with the theatre in this place, though he is not desirous to have it generally known, and this gentleman is a member of the same profession. He was about to favour us with a little anecdote connected with it when you entered." "Lots of anecdote," said the green-coated stranger of the day before, advancing to Mr. Winkle and speaking in a low and confidential tone. "Rum fellow. Does the heavy business. No actor. Strange man. All sorts of miseries. Dismal Jemmy, we call him on the circuit." Mr. Winkle and Mr. Snodgrass politely welcomed the gentleman, elegantly designated as Dismal Jemmy, and calling for brandy and water, in imitation of the remainder of the company, seated themselves at the table. "Now, sir," said Mr. Pickwick, "will you oblige us by proceeding with what you were going to relate?" The dismal individual took a dirty roll of paper from his pocket, and turning to Mr. Snodgrass, who had just taken out his note-book, said in a hollow voice, perfectly in keeping with his outward man, "Are you the poet?" I do a little in that way," replied Mr. Snodgrass, rather taken aback by the abruptness of the question. "Ah, poetry makes life what light and music do the stage. Strip the one of the false embellishments and the other of its illusions, and what is there real in either to live or care for?" "Very true, sir," replied Mr. Snodgrass. "To be before the footlights," continued the dismal man, "is like sitting at a grand court show, and admiring the silken dresses of the gaudy throng. To be behind them is to be the people who make that finery, uncared for and unknown, and left to sink or swim, to starve or live, as fortune wills it." "Certainly," said Mr. Snodgrass, for the sunken eye of the dismal man rested on him, and he felt it necessary to say something. "Go on, Jemmy," said the Spanish traveller. "Like black-eyed Susan, all in the Downs, no croaking, speak out, look lively. Will you make another glass before you begin, sir?" said Mr. Pickwick. The dismal man took the hint, and having mixed a glass of brandy and water, and slowly swallowed half of it, opened the roll of paper, and proceeded, partly to read and partly to relate, the following incident, which we find recorded on the Transactions of the Club as "The Stroller's Tale." The Stroller's Tale. "There is nothing of the marvellous in what I am going to relate," said the dismal man. "There is nothing even uncommon in it. Want and sickness are too common in many stations of life to deserve more notice than is usually bestowed on the most ordinary vicissitudes of human nature. I have thrown these few notes together because the subject of them was well known to me for many years. I traced his progress downwards, step by step, until at last he reached that excess of destitution from which he never rose again. The man of whom I speak was a low pantomime actor, and, like many people of his class, an habitual drunkard. In his better days, before he had become enfeebled by dissipation and emaciated by disease, he had been in the receipt of a good salary, which, if he had been careful and prudent, he might have continued to receive for some years. Not many, because these men either die early, or, by unnaturally taxing their bodily energies, lose prematurely those physical powers on which alone they can depend for subsistence. His besetting sin gained so fast upon him, however, that it was found impossible to employ him in the situations in which he really was useful to the theatre. The public house had a fascination for him which he could not resist. Neglected disease and hopeless poverty were as certain to be his portion as death itself, if he persevered in the same course. Yet he did persevere, and the result may be guessed. He could obtain no engagement, and he wanted bread. Everybody who is at all acquainted with theatrical matters knows what a host of shabby, poverty-stricken men hang about the stage of a large establishment. Not regularly engaged actors, but ballet people, procession men, tumblers, and so forth, who are taken on during the run of a pantomime or an Easter piece, and are then discharged until the production of some heavy spectacle occasions a new demand for their services. To this mode of life the man was compelled to resort, and taking the chair every night at some low theatrical house, at once put him in possession of a few more shillings weekly, and enabled him to gratify his old propensity. Even this resource shortly failed him. His irregularities were too great to admit of his earning the wretched pittance he might thus have procured, and he was actually reduced to a state bordering on starvation, only procuring a trifle occasionally by borrowing it of some old companion, or by obtaining an appearance at one or other of the commonest of the minor theatres. And when he did earn anything, it was spent in the old way. About this time, and when he had been existing for upwards of a year, no one knew how, I had a short engagement at one of the theatres on the Surrey side of the water, and here I saw this man, whom I had lost sight of for some time, for I had been travelling in the provinces, and he had been skulking in the lanes and alleys of London. I was dressed to leave the house, and was crossing the stage on my way out, when he tapped me on the shoulder. Never shall I forget the repulsive sight that met my eye when I turned round. He was dressed for the pantomimes, in all the absurdity of a clown's costume. The spectral figures in the Dance of Death, the most frightful shapes that the ablest painter ever portrayed on canvas, never presented an appearance half so ghastly. His bloated body and shrunken legs, their deformity enhanced 100-fold by the fantastic dress, the glassy eyes contrasting fearfully with the thick white paint with which the face was besmeared, the grotesquely ornamented head trembling with paralysis, and the long skinny hands rubbed with white chalk, all gave him a hideous and unnatural appearance, of which no description could convey an adequate idea, and which to this day I shudder to think of. His voice was hollow and tremulous as he took me aside, and in broken words recounted a long catalogue of sickness and privations, terminating as usual with an urgent request for the loan of a trifling sum of money. I put a few shillings in his hand, and as I turned away I heard the roar of laughter which followed his first tumble on the stage. A few nights afterwards a boy put a dirty scrap of paper in my hand, on which were scrawled a few words in pencil, intimating that the man was dangerously ill, and begging me, after the performance, to see him at his lodgings in some street, I forget the name of it now, at no great distance from the theatre. I promised to comply as soon as I could get away, and after the curtain fell, sallied forth on my melancholy errand. It was late, for I had been playing in the last piece, and as it was a benefit night, the performances had been protracted to an unusual length. It was a dark, cold night, with a chill, damp wind, which blew the rain heavily against the windows and house fronts. Pools of water had collected in the narrow and little frequented streets, and as many of the thinly scattered oil lamps had been blown out by the violence of the wind, the walk was not only a comfortless, but a most uncertain one. I had fortunately taken the right course, however, and succeeded, after a little difficulty, in finding the house to which I had been directed, a coal shed, with one story above it, in the back room of which lay the object of my search. A wretched-looking woman, the man's wife, met me on the stairs, and telling me that he had just fallen into a kind of doze, led me softly in, and placed a chair for me at the bedside. The sick man was lying with his face turned towards the wall, and as he took no heed of my presence, I had leisure to observe the place in which I found myself. He was lying on an old bedstead, which turned up during the day. The tattered remains of a checked curtain were drawn round the bed's head, to exclude the wind, which, however, made its way into the comfortless room through the numerous chinks in the door, and blew it to and fro every instant. There was a low cinder fire in a rusty unfixed grate, and an old three-cornered stained table, with some medicine bottles, a broken glass, and a few other domestic articles, was drawn out before it. A little child was sleeping on a temporary bed which had been made for it on the floor, and the woman sat on a chair by its side. There were a couple of shelves, with a few plates and cups and saucers, and a pair of stage shoes, and a couple of foils hung beneath them. With the exception of little heaps of rags and bundles which had been carelessly thrown into the corners of the room, these were the only things in the apartment. I had had time to note these little particulars, and to mark the heavy breathing and feverish startings of the sick man, before he was aware of my presence. In the restless attempts to procure some easy resting place for his head, he tossed his hand out of the bed, and it fell on mine. He started up and stared eagerly in my face. "Mr. Hutley, John," said his wife. "Mr. Hutley that you sent for to-night, you know." "Ah!" said the invalid, passing his hand across his forehead. Hutley. Let me see." He seemed endeavouring to collect his thoughts for a few seconds, and then, grasping me tightly by the wrist, said, "Don't leave me, old fellow. She'll murder me, I know she will." "Has he been long so?" said I, addressing his weeping wife. "Since yesterday night," she replied. John, don't you know me?" "Don't let her come near me," said the man with a shudder, as she stooped over him. "Drive her away. I can't bear her near me." He stared wildly at her with a look of deadly apprehension, and then whispered in my ear, "I beat her, Jem. I beat her yesterday, and many times before. I have starved her, and the boy too, and now I am weak and helpless, Jem. She'll murder me for it, I know she will. If you'd seen her cry as I have, you'd know it too. Keep her off." He relaxed his grasp and sank back exhausted on the pillow. I knew but too well what all this meant. If I could have entertained any doubt of it for an instant, one glance at the woman's pale face and wasted form would have sufficiently explained the real state of the case. "You had better stand aside," said I to the poor creature. "You can do him no good. Perhaps you will be calmer if he does not see you." She retired out of the man's sight. He opened his eyes after a few seconds, and looked anxiously round. "Is she gone?" he eagerly inquired. Yes, said I, "she shall not hurt you." "I'll tell you what, Jem," said the man, in a low voice, "she does hurt me. There's something in her eyes wakes such a dreadful fear in my heart that it drives me mad. Oh, last night her large staring eyes and pale face were close to mine. Wherever I turned, they turned, and whenever I started up from my sleep, she was at the bedside looking at me." He drew me closer to him, as he said in a deep, alarmed whisper, "Jem, she must be an evil spirit, a devil. Hush, I know she is. If she had been a woman, she would have died long ago. No woman could have borne what she has." I sickened at the thought of the long course of cruelty and neglect which must have occurred to produce such an impression on such a man. I could say nothing in reply, for who could offer hope or consolation to the abject being before me? I sat there for upwards of 2 hours, during which time he tossed about, murmuring exclamations of pain or impatience, restlessly throwing his arms here and there, and turning constantly from side to side. At length he fell into that state of partial unconsciousness in which the mind wanders uneasily from scene to scene and from place to place without the control of reason, but still without being able to divest itself of an indescribable sense of present suffering. Finding from his incoherent wanderings that this was the case, and knowing that in all probability the fever would not grow immediately worse, I left him, promising his miserable wife that I would repeat my visit next evening, and if necessary sit up with the patient during the night. I kept my promise. The last 24 hours had produced a frightful alteration. The eyes, though deeply sunk and heavy, shone with a lustre frightful to behold. The lips were parched and cracked in many places. The hard, dry skin glowed with a burning heat, and there was an almost unearthly air of wild anxiety in the man's face, indicating even more strongly the ravages of the disease. The fever was at its height. I took the seat I had occupied the night before, and there I sat for hours, listening to sounds which must strike deep to the heart of the most callous among human beings, the awful ravings of a dying man. From what I had heard of the medical attendant's opinion, I knew there was no hope for him. I was sitting by his death-bed. I saw the wasted limbs, which a few hours before had been distorted for the amusement of a boisterous gallery, writhing under the tortures of a burning fever. I heard the clown's shrill laugh blending with the low murmurings of the dying man. It is a touching thing to hear the mind reverting to the ordinary occupations and pursuits of health, when the body lies before you weak and helpless. But when those occupations are of a character the most strongly opposed to anything we associate with grave and solemn ideas, the impression produced is infinitely more powerful. The theatre and the public house were the chief themes of the wretched man's wanderings. It was evening, he fancied. He had a part to play that night. It was late, and he must leave home instantly. Why did they hold him, and prevent his going? He should lose the money. He must go. No, they would not let him. He hid his face in his burning hands, and feebly bemoaned his own weakness, and the cruelty of his persecutors. A short pause, and he shouted out a few doggerel rhymes, the last he had ever learned. He rose in bed, drew up his withered limbs, and rolled about in uncouth positions. He was acting. He was at the theatre. A minute's silence, and he murmured the burden of some roaring song. He had reached the old house at last. How hot the room was! He had been ill, very ill, but he was well now, and happy. Fill up his glass. Who was that dashed it from his lips? It was the same persecutor that had followed him before. He fell back upon his pillow and moaned aloud. A short period of oblivion, and he was wandering through a tedious maze of low-arched rooms, so low sometimes that he must creep upon his hands and knees to make his way along. It was close and dark, and every way he turned some obstacle impeded his progress. There were insects, too, hideous crawling things, with eyes that stared upon him and filled the very air around, glistening horribly amidst the thick darkness of the place. The walls and ceiling were alive with reptiles. The vault expanded to an enormous size. Frightful figures flitted to and fro, and the faces of men he knew, rendered hideous by gibing and mouthing, peered out from among them. They were searing him with heated irons, and binding his head with cords till the blood started, and he struggled madly for life. At the close of one of these paroxysms, when I had with great difficulty held him down in his bed, he sank into what appeared to be a slumber. Overpowered with watching and exertion, I had closed my eyes for a few minutes, when I felt a violent clutch on my shoulder. I awoke instantly. He had raised himself up so as to seat himself in bed. A dreadful change had come over his face, but consciousness had returned, for he evidently knew me. The child, who had been long since disturbed by his ravings, rose from its little bed and ran towards its father, screaming with fright. The mother hastily caught it in her arms, lest he should injure it in the violence of his insanity, but, terrified by the alteration of his features, stood transfixed by the bedside. He grasped my shoulder convulsively, and striking his breast with the other hand, made a desperate attempt to articulate. It was unavailing. He extended his arm towards them, and made another violent effort. There was a rattling noise in the throat, a glare of the eye, a short stifled groan, and he fell back, dead. It would afford us the highest gratification to be enabled to record Mr. Pickwick's opinion of the foregoing anecdote. We have little doubt that we should have been enabled to present it to our readers, but for a most unfortunate occurrence. Mr. Pickwick had replaced on the table the glass which, during the last few sentences of the tale, he had retained in his hand, and had just made up his mind to speak. Indeed, we have the authority of Mr. Snodgrass's note-book for stating that he had actually opened his mouth, when the waiter entered the room, and said, "Some gentleman, sir." It has been conjectured that Mr. Pickwick was on the point of delivering some remarks which would have enlightened the world,
if not the Thames,
when he was thus interrupted, for he gazed sternly on the waiter's countenance, and then looked round on the company generally, as if seeking for information relative to the newcomers. "Oh," said Mr. Winkle, rising, "some friends of mine. Show them in. Very pleasant fellows," added Mr. Winkle, after the waiter had retired. "Officers of the 97th, whose acquaintance I made rather oddly this morning. You will like them very much." Mr. Pickwick's equanimity was at once restored. The waiter returned, and ushered three gentlemen into the room. "Lieutenant Tappleton," said Mr. Winkle. "Lieutenant Tappleton, Mr. Pickwick. Dr. Payne, Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Snodgrass you have seen before. My friend Mr. Tupman, Dr. Payne. Dr. Slammer, Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Tupman, Dr. Slam—" Here Mr. Winkle suddenly paused, for strong emotion was visible on the countenance both of Mr. Tupman and the doctor. "I have met this gentleman before," said the doctor with marked emphasis. "Indeed?" said Mr. Winkle. "And "And that person too, if I am not mistaken," said the doctor, bestowing a scrutinizing glance on the green-coated stranger. "I think I gave that person a very pressing invitation last night, which he thought proper to decline." Saying which, the doctor scowled magnanimously on the stranger, and whispered his friend Lieutenant Tappleton. "You don't say so," said that gentleman at the conclusion of the whisper. "I do indeed," replied Dr. Slammer. "You are bound to kick him on the spot," murmured the owner of the camp stool, with great importance. "Do be quiet, Payne," interposed the lieutenant. "Will you allow me to ask you, sir," he said, addressing Mr. Pickwick, who was considerably mystified by this very unpolite by-play, "will you allow me to ask you, sir, whether that person belongs to your party?" "No, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick, "he is a guest of ours." "He is a member of your club, or I am mistaken?" said the lieutenant inquiringly. "Certainly not," responded Mr. Pickwick. "And never wears your club button?" said the lieutenant. "No, never," replied the astonished Mr. Pickwick. Lieutenant Tappleton turned round to his friend Dr. Slammer, with a scarcely perceptible shrug of the shoulder, as if implying some doubt of the accuracy of his recollection. The little doctor looked wrathful but confounded, and Mr. Payne gazed with a ferocious aspect on the beaming countenance of the unconscious Pickwick. "Sir," said the doctor, suddenly addressing Mr. Tupman, in a tone which made that gentleman start as perceptibly as if a pin had been cunningly inserted in the calf of his leg, "you were at the ball here last night." Mr. Tupman gasped a faint affirmative, looking very hard at Mr. Pickwick all the while. "That person was your companion," said the doctor, pointing to the still unmoved stranger. Mr. Tupman admitted the fact. "Now, sir," said the doctor to the stranger, "I ask you once again, in the presence of these gentlemen, whether you choose to give me your card, and to receive the treatment of a gentleman, or whether you impose upon me the necessity of personally chastising you on the spot." "Stay, sir," said Mr. Pickwick. "I really cannot allow this matter to go any further without some explanation. Tupman, recount the circumstances." Mr. Tupman, thus solemnly adjured, stated the case in a few words, touched slightly on the borrowing of the coat, expatiated largely on its having been done after dinner, wound up with a little penitence on his own account, and left the stranger to clear himself as best he could. He was apparently about to proceed to do so, when Lieutenant Tappleton, who had been eyeing him with great curiosity, said with considerable scorn, "Haven't I seen you at the theatre, sir?" "Certainly," replied the unabashed stranger. "He is a strolling actor," said the lieutenant contemptuously, turning to Dr. Slammer. "He acts in the piece that the officers of the 52nd get up at the Rochester Theatre tomorrow night. You cannot proceed in this affair, Slammer. Impossible." "Quite," said the dignified Payne. "Sorry to have placed you in this disagreeable situation," said Lieutenant Tappleton, addressing Mr. Pickwick. "Allow me to suggest that the best way of avoiding a recurrence of such scenes in future will be to be more select in the choice of your companions. Good evening, sir," and the lieutenant bounced out of the room. "And allow me to say, sir," said the irascible Dr. Payne, "that if I had been Tappleton, or if I had been Slammer, I would have pulled your nose, sir, and the nose of every man in this company. I would, sir, every man. Payne is my name, sir, Dr. Payne of the 43rd. Good evening, sir." Having concluded this speech, and uttered the last three words in a loud key, he stalked majestically after his friend, closely followed by Dr. Slammer, who said nothing, but contented himself by withering the company with a look. Rising rage and extreme bewilderment had swelled the noble breast of Mr. Pickwick almost to the bursting of his waistcoat, during the delivery of the above defiance. He stood transfixed to the spot, gazing on vacancy. The closing of the door recalled him to himself. He rushed forward, with fury in his looks and fire in his eye. His hand was upon the lock of the door. In another instant it would have been on the throat of Dr. Payne of the 43rd, had not Mr. Snodgrass seized his revered leader by the coat tail and dragged him backwards. "Restrain him!" cried Mr. Snodgrass. "Winkle, Tupman, he must not peril his distinguished life in such a cause as this." "Let me go," said Mr. Pickwick. "Hold him tight," shouted Mr. Snodgrass, and by the united efforts of the whole company Mr. Pickwick was forced into an armchair. "Leave him alone," said the green-coated stranger. "Brandy and water. Jolly old gentleman. Lots of pluck. Swallow this. Ah, capital stuff." Having previously tested the virtues of a bumper, which had been mixed by the dismal man, the stranger applied the glass to Mr. Pickwick's mouth, and the remainder of its contents rapidly disappeared. There was a short pause. The brandy and water had done its work. The amiable countenance of Mr. Pickwick was fast recovering its customary expression. "They are not worth your notice," said the dismal man. "You are right, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick. "They are not. I am ashamed to have been betrayed into this warmth of feeling. Draw your chair up to the table, sir." The dismal man readily complied. A circle was again formed round the table, and harmony once more prevailed. Some lingering irritability appeared to find a resting place in Mr. Winkle's bosom, occasioned possibly by the temporary abstraction of his coat, though it is scarcely reasonable to suppose that so slight a circumstance can have excited even a passing feeling of anger in a Pickwickian's breast. With this exception, their good humour was completely restored, and the evening concluded with the conviviality with which it had begun. Chapter 3